We have already seen crazy weather and earthquake activity in 2023, and we're only going into the month of June next week. And already massive quakes that hit Turkey, all kinds of crazy weather. So what does the future hold when it comes to weather, especially hurricanes and hurricane season that's we're going into in a couple weeks? What does hurricane season look like? And what about all the earthquakes that have been happening? Just in the past week, today's May 25th, 2023, in the past week, we have had 170 4.5 earthquakes or higher in magnitude. That's off the charts, friends. So what does the future hold? Again, we're going to look into all that today. I welcome you. Sat Nam, Ola. I'm so glad to be here with you today. I hope you're having a great day. My name is Joseph Tittel, aka Spiritman JT. And again, I welcome you with infinite love and gratitude to my channel. If you're new here, you want accurate predictions, prophecy, truth, good content, then you found the perfect tribe. Be sure to smash that subscribe. Down below, you will find, and we welcome you to Team Spirit, by the way. Thank you for joining our team and our tribe. Down below, you'll find the links to all my social media content, including the Awaken Your Spirit community on Subscribestar. I thank all of my supporters because this free content wouldn't be possible for everybody if it weren't for them. So kudos. We are so grateful for you. Moving right on to earthquakes and hurricanes. So the latest list of hurricanes has just been released. But I'm going to start off by telling you that late August into September, even though we're only just going into June, I would tell you to expect the biggest activity to be from late August into September and into October. That's going to bring about the most significant weather events and earthquakes, aside from what already happened in Turkey with that huge, massive earthquake, because that's just, again, historic right there. July jumps out at me, the month of July, very, very strongly. Excuse me. So July jumps out at me really strong. And I would tell you to expect some type of a historic event to take place in the way of weather or massive earthquakes when it comes to the month of July. This could also be the month in which we could not only experience extreme weather, but a massive quake that is accompanied by a massive tsunami. Now, if you watch me, especially every Tuesday, you'll know that a couple weeks ago, I had a vision, maybe last month, I don't know, it's been within the past month, a vision of a great big wave coming. That could be symbolic in two different forms. That could be a wave being, again, symbolism in my visions that a big wave of energy is going to, wash over the planet. But it could also be literal, that a big wave, a tsunami is coming. And that's the way I took it, especially being many of you have been having dreams and sending me comments and messages lately that you, or especially your little kids, are having dreams or talking about big wave coming. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, but I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. A day that I would tell you to look out for would be July 7th. 777, because July 7th, of course, 7-7, and we're in a 7-year in numerology. So that jumps out at me quite a bit, that date, whether it be weather related or whether it be some other major event on the planet, not sure, but I'm going to go with something weather related. Likely, that could be the date that we see a massive quake and tsunami hit, right on that date or right around that date between the 7th and the 11th of July. Also, definitely, I'm pulled to the Pacific Ocean, but what if there's actually two? Because I was pulled in two places, one in the Pacific Ocean and one in the Indian Ocean. So not that they're both going to be tsunamis that affect people. We already just had a tsunami. I forget where it was recently, but luckily it didn't hit people, of course. But I do feel like something's coming and brewing when it comes to a huge wave coming that could potentially put over 100,000 lives in jeopardy. So let's hold in the light that doesn't occur. But let's take a look at hurricanes. So as far as last year's hurricanes are concerned, if you look back at last year's weather predictions, pretty crazy stuff that all came into fruition. Last year, we had 14 named storms. Not all hurricanes, but storms, tropical storms and so forth. So 14 last year, and I'm going to say that this year we're going to see at least 17. Last year, we had 8 hurricane storms. I'm going to actually jump down one and say 7 this year. And last year we had two major 3.3 category higher or hurricanes, category 3 or higher hurricanes last year. Two. I'm going to say we're actually going to end up with 3 or 4 of them this year. So there were 4 storms that hit the United States. Not all hurricanes, but 4 big storms that hit. I think one of them was a hurricane at least. I'm going to go with 6 this year. So again, last year 14 named storms, this year 17. 8 hurricanes, so I'm going to actually break it down to 7, although there's going to be, those 7 in themselves are going to be huge. Last year we had 2 huge ones. This year I'm going to say that it's going to go up 3 to 4. So the ones that we do have, even though it's less than last year, they're going to be doozies, real big doozies. And quite a bit of storms hitting the United States in different parts. 2023 is going to be somewhat, they're going to say it's somewhat of a normal season, but really, is it really a normal season? I don't know about that. I see 2 major storms in my visions today that were like together. I had this before and it happened. It was pretty crazy actually. But in this vision, I saw them kind of splitting apart together, but splitting apart, and one going up this way and one just disappearing out into probably tropical storm land. I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but let's take a look at some of the names of these hurricanes. Here's a list of all the names, and I added to this list of names the numerology, the numbers that are based around the names, because that is very significant. Numbers mean everything. If you've been following me long enough, numbers, astrology, and psychic intuition all put together gives us the best accuracy, right? So you see all the different numbers of the hurricanes, and what jumped out at me as soon as I looked at the list, remember I put these numbers in there, they weren't there before. As soon as I opened up the list of hurricanes, the first one that jumped right out at me and literally bit me was Margot. And if you look at the list here, you'll see that Margot is a number 11. And Nigel is a number 11. Back-to-back 11s. And there's been some pretty catastrophic 11 hurricanes, including Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina was an 11. And Hurricane Andrew was an 11 in 1992. 2 huge, major hurricanes, Andrew and Katrina, that were both 11s. And now this year, again, at the list, we have Margot and Nigel back-to-back number 11s, which means it's very likely, and I know it's going to be, but likely at the same time, that those are both going to show up out at sea at the same time. Chances are, because I had the vision of the 2 hurricanes together splitting apart before I looked at the list of hurricanes. When I looked at the list, again, Margot was the name that jumped out at me like so strongly. And according to the list, it says these were names that were replacing Harvey, Irma, Maria, and Nate, I guess from last year. So going back to the numerology, some other significant ones that jump out pretty strongly to me. Now, Brett is a 9, and 9 storms have been pretty devastating, like Hurricane Sandy, for example, was a 9 storm. But Brett feels too early to me, too soon. So I would tell you another one that jumped out at me pretty strongly was a combination of Franklin, and I just thought maybe because it was an odd name, not that it was just the storm itself, but it was just, I thought Franklin, I'm like, that's an interesting name. But Adalia jumped out at me pretty strongly. Adalia is a 9 storm, and so is Tammy. And Tammy also jumped out at me very strongly. But the one that jumped out at me the most was Margot. And then when I discovered Margot and Nigel both being 11 storms relating to Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Katrina, and that's pretty far down the list, which means it's going to be later in the season, right? And that's what Spirit gave me the feeling that it's the later season that we have to be worried about. If you remember last year in my predictions, I said a storm would show up, a hurricane outside of the season, and it did. I don't believe it made landfall or anything came from it, but it did show up, which was really odd because it was outside of the season. I would tell you to expect that again this year. Last year, I also said there'd be a storm that would come right before the season even started, which it did. This year, I think it'll be a late start, if anything. Not that things aren't going to be developing, but again, here's your list again, looking at the hurricanes. Some other numbers that jumped out in the past when I looked up history of big hurricanes. The 9s always jump out strong. The 11s, of course. But think about this, friends. If Nigel and Margot are out at sea at the same time, both 11 storms, and if you follow me again long enough, you know the numerology, and the number is 11, 22, 33. So both of those storms at the same time would be a 22 vibration on the sea. That's huge, friends. That is like huge significant. I wouldn't even be surprised to see two storms come together this season into one major storm, and those two storms coming together, Nigel and Margot. And if that were to occur, oh, that would be just absolutely devastating if it touched land, which it likely would. So, going back, I had a couple other visions that were interesting. I had a vision of floods. This happened, I think back in the 80s, but I saw caskets, caskets with bodies in them, likely, floating in the waters, which means it's a cemetery that's flooded, and apparently they're going to come to the surface, I would assume. But I had a vision of that, and I think this could be anywhere in the world, really. But if I had to pick a place, I would say the Carolinas, the east coast of the United States. Whether it's hurricane related, and it's not so much hurricanes that we have to worry about, but it's severe storms, big tropical storms. So even though I talked about all these storms and my predictions revolved around how many, some of these bigger storms that bring the most devastation don't have to be the hurricane strength. They could still be the tropical storms that bring about great flooding. Things are going to become very active. Let me bring up the list again. In the list, you'll see between Lee and Sean. That part of the map felt on the list, not the map, but that part between Lee and Sean. So from Lee, Margot, Nigel, Ophelia, Felipe, Rena, and Sean, that whole window in there jumped out at me, starting with Lee. So Lee is a 4 storm, and we've had devastating hurricane 4s. The most common ones, again, looking at the list with numbers, is the 11s, of course, are the 11s. The 9s are the second most common. And then I've seen a few 6s and a few 4s in the history of major hurricanes. Rarely do you see the 1s. I have seen them. But you don't see like the 3, the 4. It's kind of you do see the 4. I'm sorry, but the 3, the 5. It's kind of interesting. But numbers mean everything, especially when you got 2 hurricanes out at sea that both number 11s. That's insane. That's pretty wild. Especially if, again, it's going to happen. I have no doubt. Especially being 0 in a row on the list. I mean, common sense would say that it's more than likely going to happen. So between, again, Lee and Sean. So from Margot to Rena could also be where we see similar storms, multiple storms, all developing at the same time. So from Margot to Rena, so that whole little window of storms right there, being all active or the most active time period, which is probably going to be in September. The end, probably September. This could also be where my vision of 2 storms splitting apart comes in. One of those storms, again, developed in my vision really quickly, while the other one broke apart. Both these storms developed in my vision quickly, but it could be my vision going in high speed, fast forward. And again, one kind of broke off and the other one came straight up. And I believe that's straight up the coast of the United States on the East Coast. I didn't see exactly where the storms went in my vision, but they jumped out at me, these 2 storms real big, and one breaking off and the other one getting bigger, like huge. I would say category 3, maybe a category 4 or 5. Moving on. So Margot and Nigel, again, could be those 2 storms coming together just because that would bring the 22 energy. And I just thought that was wild. 2 11 storms and a 22 vibration all in the sea. I'd be running from the path of that storm. So these are 2 storms definitely to watch super closely when they develop, and also to pay attention to the date and time that they develop, because the dates have everything to do with everything as well. Both Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Sandy came in on an 11 day. There's that 11, which was the 29th of a month. Very common. If you know that a storm's going to touch down on the 11th or 29th of a month, again, you better run for cover. Big time. So not only that date, so like any storm that develops, the date will determine literally the results of all these storms, the dates that we have them, especially if there's significant master number dates in numerology. So always be tuned into my show, because I'm here every Tuesday with updates, with predictions, stories, and everything else. Be sure to subscribe. And every week we talk about weather or whatever needs to be talked about and whatever new predictions Spirit gives me. So remember, any storm projected to make landfall on the dates, the 11th or the 29th of a month, are going to be the most dangerous storms to take cover for. I saw a vision of flooded subways. And I actually, in my vision, I saw pumps being placed in place to pump out the water out of these subway systems, and also basements, lower level buildings, kind of like lower level apartment buildings getting completely flooded, and they're coming with pumps and pumping everything out. It looked pretty significant and pretty severe, and I believe that this could be occurring actually in multiple places, starting with New York, because it's the first place I think of. I guess that's an American thing when you think of subways. But it doesn't have to be that either. It could also be taking place in the United Kingdom, because United Kingdom popped out at me strongly when it came to severe weathers and that whole upper part. We're going to take a look at a map in a few minutes. So, yeah, a couple other places that I feel like are in the path of destruction, potential destruction, would include the Bahamas. And the Bahamas and several islands could end up being what gets hit the hardest this coming season. Again, starting with the Bahamas, including Puerto Rico, Santo Domingo, and one storm passing through Cuba. That doesn't have to be a hurricane. Again, that could be a tropical storm. And if it does, even if it's a hurricane that passes through Cuba, it's breaking down by the time it gets through Cuba. So Cuba is a place to keep an eye on this year as well, and those whole islands down there in the Caribbean Sea. One vision I had was a storm heading somewhat towards Florida, Miami, and the East Coast, of course. Except Spirit gave me a strong feeling that the storm is completely out of whack or out of balance, which was really weird to me. So I could say that this storm could easily be manipulated so that the storm slams right into Florida, bringing about disaster. And we know that they have the ability to do that. They did it to Hurricane Sandy. All of a sudden, she just took a sharp left turn, and slammed into New Jersey. Come on now. And we know they have weather modification technology. So that's what I got out of this when Spirit said it gave me a strong feeling the storm's out of whack and out of balance, and therefore could be easily manipulated. And that would be a storm. Anything that comes along the edge of Florida, I would tell the Floridians to take cover and be aware and watch closely, because even though it might be going that way, don't be surprised if it takes a sudden turn and blows right into your city or your town. Be safe. Really be aware. So being aware can help you to prepare. Going into fear is just going to screw you up and sabotage you. Just always be prepared, friends. That's all I can say. So the Florida Keys, Miami jumped out at me in that particular storm. Spirit said to also pay attention to big storms that develop off the west coast of Africa. A warning of a large storm whipping through Madagascar, which they just had that happen, last year or 6 months ago or something? But it jumped out at me again today. Something huge going through Madagascar. The storms that Spirit told us to pay attention of, big storms developing, again, that's the west coast of Africa, and probably heading towards us or up towards maybe, I'm not sure. We'll look at the map in a moment, though, in just 2 minutes, actually. So also the El Nino. And I feel like that's going to have a very strong effect when it does develop, whether it's now or whether it's next season. But there's a extremely strong El Nino developing, is what Spirit told me, that we haven't seen since 2015. So, and I didn't look back at 2015 weather, but if you do look back at 2015 weather, that'll give you an idea what we're in for. And this could be good when it comes to hurricanes and breaking apart hurricanes, but at the same time, it can still bring about severe tropical storms, cyclones, and another wet monsoon season here in the Wild Wild West. And I don't think drought's going to be too much of a problem for most people this year. Don't quote me on that. There are problems, like the Euphrates River, but here in the United States, if they say California's in a drought again, they're lying. They're stealing the water for someone else. So let's take a look at a map for a moment. I'll tell you about a few different places that jumped out at me and a few other predictions that I have in different areas to warn, including places like Australia, Mike. So let's take a look at the map. A couple places that I want you to see. Let me just pull this up. There we go. Google Earth here, friends. Google Earth. And a couple places that jumped out at me. I do a method which I call map scrying, that I deemed as map scrying, which is kind of like gazing into a crystal ball, but doing it with a map. This whole area right here, Argentina, this whole little end right here of South America jumped out at me so strongly when I pulled up this map. So this could be an area where we could see one of these coming tsunami waves. But it was actually more, I was pulled more to the very, very tip down here, which I don't think there's anything there. I mean, we could zoom in and look, but I don't know. I guess people live there. Yeah, it looks like that. But I think there's some volcanoes down there too. And then all this whole coast. Also, I heard in my channeling today, to show you Argentina because it's there. I heard very loudly, "Don't cry for me, Argentina." So that jumped out at me. I got a little bit more. I'll go into more detail about that. And let me shrink this a second. Down here, yeah, right in here, this little area. So I remember in the past I talked about islands sinking into the ocean. And I think that is very related between Fiji and New Caledonia. And it may actually be New Caledonia. And it's actually this triangle. Actually, we'll take this whole triangle from Fiji to the Solomon Islands down to the New Caledonia. And all these islands in here. And I believe that could be where we see the big sinking coming. And if that were to occur, I would tell people down here in Brisbane to be prepared for big waves to come floating your direction. And I would tell this whole area between Queensland and down here in Brisbane, Australia, to be very aware of the earthquake activity out here in the Coral Sea and between this triangle that I just told you. We can even make that triangle even a little bit bigger. It's a little bit of an odd triangle by going up here to Papua New Guinea, which already has a lot of activity. But again, I'm going to go with my first instinct and my first pull, which was all in this little area right here between the Solomon Islands, New Caledonia, Fiji, and then even this triangle here between Fiji, Samoa, and the Tonga. And the Tonga has just gotten pounded with some earthquakes. But this is where I believe the islands are going to end up sinking. And I do believe that's going to happen much sooner than we would want it to. Another area that jumps out at me, this whole part of the map here, like this whole area just feels endangered to me. All the way down from Thailand, all in here. But especially the Philippines. Because I felt, and I haven't told you this yet, I'll go into it after we are done looking at this map, but I had visions of Philippines, this area of the Philippines, and Taiwan. Taiwan, without a doubt, I said it in past predictions, is going to end up with some severe earthquake activity in the near future. And the tsunamis potentials, which I showed you on the one side of the map near Australia, this is another place right here. Another high potential for tsunami activity would come here from the Philippine Sea, affecting the Philippines, Taiwan. And Japan, of course, is always at risk because they're right here too. And I did get that there's going to be a massive eruption that occurs out here in the Pacific Ocean near Hawaii. I'll go into that in a few minutes, but let me continue map scrying. So the Sea of Japan, was it the Sea of Japan or was it up here? Hold on. Yeah, it was here. The Sea of Japan right here jumped out at me. Now, I made predictions revolved around that in the past, but right now we're focused more on earthquakes and tsunami potential. And I feel like some kind of major earthquake activity. And Japan would have to worry more about earthquake activity over here, same with the Koreas, north and south, than I would worry about the Pacific. This feels more to me like a place of worry and concern. Now, our friends up there in China, or Russia's just a mess. I said it in the past, again, they do have the ability to make weather events occur with weather modification, and I would not at all be surprised to see a massive quake that isn't natural, if you know what I mean, happening right here in Russia, probably in Moscow. So I would tell you to expect a shaking to the people of Moscow. Now, again, things are symbolic. As a spiritual medium, sometimes I get things like something shaking in Moscow, and it could be something else. Symbolic. But again, my tone right now is tuning in on earthquakes and on tsunamis. So let me go over here. Where are we at? The United States. Why am I upside down? Why am I upside down? There we go. United States. So again, I said this in the past, but here's an area I really want to pull up for you that jumped out at me. The first thing that jumped out at me today actually is the Cayman Islands, right in here. Earthquake activity. The Cayman Islands. Even something happening in Cayman Islands that's felt in Cuba. Other place, and this could be where the Cayman Islands come in actually, was right here between Guatemala and Nicaragua. So that would be Honduras or El Salvador. Big earthquake activity right there, which takes us back to, well, that's not it. So where was the other place? Yemen. Where's Yemen? Yemen popped out at me really strong. Where is Yemen? Yemen's in the Middle East, as we know. There we go. So we looked at the Marshall Islands, the Cayman Islands, Taiwan, between India and where are we at? Come on, map. Participate with me. There we go. Names. Thank you. India. So right up here in India, near New Delhi, or New Delhi. Delhi, is that how you say that? New Delhi. So there, and there's another part of India. Oh, here we are. I was looking for Yemen. Okay, yeah, between Yemen and India. So right in here, which means that there could be something that occurs right out here at the Arabian Sea. But Yemen jumped out at me strongly. And up here where I just said, near New Delhi, India. And then let me go over to Portugal and Spain. Between Portugal and Spain jumped out at me. I can't find it. And then I'm on the wrong side of the world here. I want to go over here. Am I making you dizzy? Sorry. Over here is where I wanted to go. Between Portugal and Spain. So right here in this spot, right between the two, jumped out at me really strongly. So between Portugal and Spain. And then the last one was Rome. Between Rome, right here. Right in this, where the hoof of the boot is, right there. Between Rome and Greece, right in between there. And I don't know if the Mediterranean Sea earthquake could cause a bit of a small tsunami to hit Greece and Italy, but I'll definitely put that potential out to you all. So moving away from the map, and we'll look at that again later for my next show, but going back to the map and going back, what else did I have here? Yeah, between Rome and Greece is where I saw something happening, and a volcanic eruption in that very near future between those two places as well, between Rome and Greece, and something major. It felt like, and I don't know the names of volcanoes and all, but it felt like one of those, what is this, pump, begins with a P. Might be that particular volcano. A few other places that jumped out at me when I was channeling today was the state of Nevada when it comes to severe storms, extreme heat, and power outages. The state of Washington, more so for a potential quake and a small tsunami, a small wave, injuring no one. And again, I told you earlier, I heard him in my head, "Don't cry for me, Argentina." So I would expect this to be connected to some type of disaster, likely a massive earthquake that is going to hit Argentina and maybe a nearby tsunami for Argentina as well. We're going to see quite an uptick of activity when it comes to more tsunami warnings. They're warnings, though. It's good that they're just warnings. But, we've gotten so many warnings globally for tsunamis that did not take place. Good thing for the warnings, though. But the thing is people will start to be like, don't cry wolf. And then people aren't going to pay attention, or they're not going to pay attention to the tsunami warnings. Take those tsunami warnings, no matter where you live in the world, very, very seriously. Because luckily, most of what I heard today in my head, sirens, screaming out, most of them were not to worry about, although Spirit did give me the strong feeling that one tsunami warning will be too late by the time people react to it, according to my spirit guides. So summertime here in the Northern Hemisphere does feel like it's actually not going to be as bad when it comes to the heat. And again, that depends, of course, where you live. Places like Greenland will experience a short heat wave and some type of a melting that probably could bring about some type of flooding as well between Greenland and also Iceland. And I felt whatever was happening in Greenland, it felt very unusual to me. It's all I could get when I connected to the continent of Greenland. It just felt unusual. Like unusual things happening there, significant unusual things. So therefore, I would tell people in Greenland to expect very unusual weather patterns and earthquake activity or earth activity, which includes, of course, volcanoes as well. One of the major volcanic eruptions will likely fall somewhere in the area between Greenland and Iceland. And Iceland will be really the most vulnerable when it comes to a significant size quake in the near future. Iceland, but that whole part of the globe, a lot of activity happening up there in the near future, especially as we get to the fall months again, September, October, fall here in the Northern Hemisphere. The fall season, speaking of the fall, is going to be much drier for the northern parts of the United States and Canada, while we're going to see a much wetter, it doesn't sound right, wetter. It's going to be more wet is what it's going to be in the southern parts. So this goes for the entire summer, but even more so when we get to the fall and the early winter. This is ways off, but it came today, so I'm going to tell you anyway. Early snowfalls as the cold whips in early to many, if not most places globally. As winter sets in the Northern Hemisphere, we will see common blasts of Arctic air hitting places unexpectedly. And rare cold in places like San Francisco, San Diego, for example. And of course, I'll have several more weather videos before we get to that time of the year in winter anyway. I'll have a winter forecast. So again, all the more reason to subscribe. And if you didn't click that like button, could you please take a millisecond to do so? Because I love you and I appreciate it. So although winter in the Southern Hemisphere will be unusually warm temperatures and sudden unexpected heat waves, one thing that will add to the heat in our planet is a coming influx of volcanic activity, while we will see two fairly large volcanoes erupting simultaneously alongside of a smaller eruption. Eruptions can be expected to occur around the Hawaiian Islands, which will bring more earthquakes than usual to the Hawaiian Islands, or if it's not more earthquakes, it could be just the magnitude, a little higher magnitude than usual for Hawaiian Islands. And the whole upper part of Alaska, luckily for Alaska, that activity is going to be towards the tip where there is no people. So that's good for them. But once again, we're going to witness smoke, ash, and ocean waters spilling up into the skies from volcanic activity occurring beneath the ocean. And I said this, I think it was 2 years ago, and then it happened. It was pretty interesting. but I saw something much bigger than that this time. And it seemed to be occurring to me in my vision on a series of what it's like islands, a series of volcanic islands, but they're underwater. Like, so you have that like in Indonesia, you have it around Hawaii, a whole series of islands that are all volcanic and volcanoes, but this is what it looked like, but it was underwater. So I'm sure once upon a time it was probably above water. But in my vision, it was a series of underground volcanoes, all bursting. Not all of them bursting, but that's where the burst is coming from. And this, of course, Spirit told me would add a little bit to the ocean's temperatures, with other factors that are going to bring about a very stormy late summer and fall in the north, and a very wet spring and the large percentage of the southern hemisphere. So again, a lot of wet weather here in the north. When I say north, I mean northern hemisphere, by the way, not just like North United States. Just talking about hemispheres. Talking about hemispheres here. Did you know if you go down, I went to Peru, and when you flush the toilet or the sink, the water goes down the sink, it goes the opposite direction. It goes counterclockwise. And I didn't believe it until I tried it, and I swear I stood there for 10 minutes playing with that damn toilet and sink, watching the water go opposite direction. It just fascinated the heck out of me. I thought it was just so fascinating. But anyway, on another note, I would tell folks globally who reside in the southern parts to expect storms unlike anything they have ever seen in quite some time. Maybe some of the strongest storms in general. Late summer into fall, especially in the month of September and October, expect there to be record-breaking storms bringing about flash floods and major flooding along coastlines especially. So this year's weather could end up being responsible for taking more lives than previous years in history. So I don't know what's happening, but I just had this feeling that this year would end up being responsible for more lives than usual. Which I guess we could say already potentially happened with Turkey's earthquake. But even excluding that, Spirit made me feel that it's going to be, unfortunately a record breaker with that. And of course, the elite will use that as their way to push their climate, everything with the earth, without me saying it. But the East Coast of the United States has luckily lucked out, and I'm jumping to the winter a little bit, but this came up again, and I don't hold back. If it comes to me, I put it out to you. So as far as snow and blizzards are concerned, the East Coast and my friends back in Pennsylvania were very lucky, but Spirit says you're not going to be so lucky this coming winter season. The worst part of winter is about going to be ice storms more than anything. So it's not going to be as much snow as ice. So I would say we're going to have a lot of warm, fluctuating temperatures. But again, I will do a weather video for winter when we get closer to that period of time. But again, it did come up to me, and it also showed me one state from ice storms, literally more than half the state is in the dark. So interesting. So Australia and New Zealand also need to be prepared for severe flooding events. The west coast of Australia jumps out at me really strongly when I connect to that on the map. New Zealand, I see more nearby volcanic activity for the folks in New Zealand, and a pretty significant quake. September comes to mind as well. So, a lot of these things I would hope are the very near future, especially when I'm talking about earthquakes, because as you know, I say things about earthquakes and, they very often happen a couple days later or within a week or so. That's why I put out this is being recorded on the 25th of May, and you're going to be watching it on the 26th of May. Or 27th, depending on where in the planet you are. My friends in Japan will be watching this on the 27th, their time. So, September jumped out at me, especially between New Zealand and Australia. I do know that we are in that next Mercury retrograde dreaded cycle in September, so and that always has major effects on everything. So China and literally the entire Asian continent came into me today. So I'm going to say very, very rough weather and major quake activity is going to start to ignite in the Asian continent, which is interesting because China's been pretty quiet with earthquakes, but that's not going to be for long. So just to take a guess, using no intuition at all, no psychic abilities, if I were to guess where the next big, gigantic quake were to be, I'd say I wouldn't be surprised at all to see that 8.0 or higher magnitude hitting China. Not to mention, and definitely the Asian continent of Asia. Not to mention record-breaking cyclones. We just saw one just pounded, I forget where that was, but huge. I don't know what the results were, but it was huge before it hit land, so I'm sure it was pretty bad. But record-breaking cyclones and storms, and I'm telling you, pounding the coastlines especially, and some major cities. I don't know in my vision if I was looking at Tokyo, Japan, or Beijing, China, or both. But I had a vision and I saw people running for cover, putting things over their head and like running for cover because high winds began tossing heavy objects into the air and the streets began to flood very quickly. And it could be both those places. Again, Tokyo, Japan, Beijing, China. Severe flooding and storms in 2023 will be responsible for the breaches of 2 to 3 dams or water levees. I had a vision of one water levee that's along a river. It looked like a river to me. And I saw it burst at its seam, and it seemed to be pouring in on land that looked partially like farmland to me. I saw farm animals running for cover away from this coming water. And for the most part, it looked like all those animals did make it to higher ground. At least that's what I was hoping the vision was showing me. I saw a man in rushing waters coming closer. The waters were rushing. He was in the water. And the water's rushing, and he's like pushing animals. So I don't know if it's the same vision, all related, or if it's two separate. It's probably two separate visions. But definitely one along a farmland and where there's farm animals. So we hold in the light that those farm animals are safe. And I believe we will see this occur in several places. One of them places being the United States with these water levee breaks. The dam break, I see a big dam breaking. I think that might actually end up being in China. So I do not know what city I'm in when I see this, but I see the heat blazing, like ungodly heat blazing. With practically the streets are empty because people just don't want to be out because it's so hot. And then I see the power gets cut and people are scorching in this heat that is bound to cause several fatalities. I don't know where this is, but India came to my mind pretty strongly as well. So it could be two separate things, but India, I say the same warning to severe heat and power outages. Folks need to become used to having no power during heat waves because, you know, the elite puppeteers, as we know, aim to make us sweat it out as much as they can, all for the good of the climate, of course, all for the good of that, as people die from heat strokes and everything else. And, you know, again, this year's going to be mild compared to what I believe is going to happen in the future. Luckily, we're not going to be seeing nearly as bad until we hit the year 2025. And I'll have more on weather, more on different things on Tuesday's show. Join me every Tuesday for Tuesday's Tea Time predictions updates. I hope to see you there. I hope you joined our tribe. If you have, welcome to Team Spirit. I'll be back again on Tuesday. And hey, you never know, I might pop up before that. Until then, be safe out there. Keep prepared. Have a backup of energy. Have candles. Have flashlights. And have backup of food and something that you can cook on. Because you never know who could be hit and if you could be one of those victims of Mother Nature in the near future. Until the next time, be bold, be true, be kind, be you. Spiritman JT signing off, wishing you an amazing rest of your day. Namaste.